What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
The air hung thick with the scent of sizzling burgers on the grill and the faint crackle of anticipation for the evening fireworks display that always turned our quiet suburban backyard into a makeshift spectacle of red, white, and blue patriotism during those classic 4th of July gatherings in our Ohio neighborhood, where families like mine pretended everything was as stable and predictable as the flag waving lazily from the porch. But deep down I sensed the undercurrents of unspoken tensions, bubbling just beneath the surface, much like the foam on a freshly poured root beer float, and that's precisely what caught me off guard when I arrived at my son David's home that warm afternoon, balancing a large bowl of my homemade potato salad in one arm while greeting neighbors with the usual nods and smiles that masked the weariness from driving across town in my old sedan that had seen better days, but still got me where I needed to go reliably enough for a widow navigating life on her own, after losing my husband to that sudden heart attack a decade earlier. As I stepped through the gate into the backyard alive with laughter from cousins chasing each other around the picnic tables laden with coleslaw, watermelon slices dripping juice onto checkered cloths, and deviled eggs arranged in neat rows that Carla always insisted upon for that picture-perfect touch, my eyes scanned the crowd, instinctively searching for my 5-year-old granddaughter Lily, whose infectious energy and bouncy curls had become the highlight of these family events ever since she started toddling around with that determined gait that reminded me so much of David at her age. Yet when I finally spotted her peeking out from behind her mother's legs near the kiddie pool where inflatable toys bobbed gently in the shallow water, a wave of shock washed over me, colder than the ice in the coolers, because her once vibrant head of chestnut curls that she loved to twirl while listening to my bedtime stories about far-off adventures was completely absent, replaced by a stark, smooth scalp that gleamed under the afternoon sun in a way that made her look vulnerable and strangely aged beyond her tender years, evoking images of those poignant photographs from history books depicting children enduring hardships far greater than any preschool playground squabble. I stood there frozen for what felt like an eternity, the bowl trembling slightly in my grip as the chatter around me blurred into a distant hum overshadowed by the pounding of my heart that echoed the confusion and rising anger building within me like a summer storm gathering on the horizon. Because this wasn't merely a whim of fashion or a playful experiment gone awry, but something deliberate and jarring that stripped away a piece of the innocence I cherished in her, and, before I could even process the full implications, Carla, my daughter-in-law with her impeccably styled bob haircut and the confident stride of someone who had climbed her way through real estate sales by sheer willpower, caught my stare and responded with a laugh that rang out sharp and defensive, claiming that Lily simply needed a change to toughen her up after some teasing at school about her wild hair that apparently made the other children giggle during recess. But even as she delivered those words with a casual shrug that belied the tightness around her eyes, I could see Lily tugging nervously at the hem of her sundress patterned with tiny American flags. Her small face flushed as she avoided direct eye contact with me in a manner that twisted something deep inside my chest, reminding me of how she'd always run straight into my arms during past celebrations, seeking the comfort of a hug that smelled like lavender soap and unwavering reliability. Without a moment's hesitation, I set the potato salad down on the nearest table amid the array of side dishes, where it landed with a soft thud that seemed to punctuate the moment's gravity, then knelt down to Lily's level on the freshly mowed grass that tickled my knees through my capri pants, gently taking her tiny hand in mine and feeling the warmth of her palm against my callous fingers that had baked countless pies and folded endless loads of laundry over the years, a simple gesture that conveyed more reassurance than any words could in that charged atmosphere. And as I rose slowly while still holding on to her, I turned my gaze directly toward David, who was stationed at the grill flipping patties with tongs that glinted in the sunlight, his broad shoulders tense under the polo shirt he'd worn to look the part of the responsible host, even though his eyes darted away from mine in that familiar pattern of avoidance he developed sometime after marrying Carla 5 years back when life started pulling him in directions I couldn't always follow. In a voice steady but laced with the unyielding conviction born from decades of holding our family together through job losses, illnesses, and the quiet heartaches that come with raising children in a world that doesn't always play fair. I looked him square in the eyes and declared that he had made his choice in allowing this to happen under his watchful roof, the words hanging in the air like the smoke from the barbecue that curled upward in lazy spirals, drawing subtle glances from aunts and uncles who pretended to focus on their plates of ribs slathered in tangy sauce while whispering among themselves about the sudden shift in the festive mood that had promised games of horseshoes and stories swapped over cold beers. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a haze of forced normalcy where conversations veered toward safe topics like the rising cost of groceries at the local market or the latest neighborhood renovation project that had everyone up in arms about parking spaces, but I couldn't shake the persistent image of Lily's bare head catching glints of light as she played tentatively with a beach ball passed her way by a cousin who mercifully didn't comment on the change. And throughout it all, a subtle humor crept into my thoughts despite the turmoil, imagining how this so-called fresh start might inspire Carla to next suggest matching tattoos for the family or perhaps dyeing their eyebrows blue for the next holiday, a wry notion that lightened the weight just enough to keep me from exploding right there amid the potato chip bags and plastic utensils. As the sun began its descent and the first fireworks preparations involved uncles setting up sparklers in tin cans filled with sand, painting preliminary bursts of color against the deepening sky that should have evoked joy and unity, but instead amplified the knot of unresolved questions tightening in my stomach, I bid goodnight to the group with hugs for Lily that lingered a second longer than usual, promising her a special baking day soon where we'd make cookies shaped like stars to celebrate her bravery, and then drove back to my modest house on Elm Street lined with maple trees that rustled softly in the evening breeze, the solitude enveloping me like an old blanket as I unpacked the day's emotional baggage by staring at framed photos on the mantel depicting happier times with David as a boy and Lily in her first Easter bonnet, tossing and turning through a restless night interrupted only by the distant pops of neighborhood fireworks that echoed like unresolved punctuation marks until the shrill ring of my telephone pierced the early morning quiet around 7 o'clock. The caller ID flashing David's name in a way that sent a jolt through me because I knew this call carried the weight of explanations long overdue, and when I finally answered after letting it ring twice to compose myself, his voice came through the line. Hesitant and pleading with those simple words, "Mom, please let me explain," igniting the spark of a deeper confrontation that would unravel threads I never imagined were so frayed in the fabric of our family life. That morning call from David lingered in the air of my kitchen like the steam rising from my second cup of coffee brewed strong enough to jolt awake the dead after a night of fitful sleep haunted by visions of Lily's smooth scalp reflecting the fireworks glow. And when I finally lifted the receiver on the third ring, my voice emerged calm yet edged with the quiet authority I'd honed over years of mediating sibling squabbles and nursing scraped knees during backyard escapades that defined our family's resilient spirit in this heartland town where perseverance often meant swallowing pride with your morning toast. He tumbled into explanations right away, painting a picture of Lily's persistent hair-pulling habit that had escalated over the past few months into bald patches hidden under hats during playdates and school photos, attributing it to the stresses of kindergarten adjustments and perhaps the subtle strains of their household finances that he'd hinted at before but never fully unpacked, insisting that Carla's decision for the full shave stemmed from a pediatrician's vague recommendation to interrupt the cycle dramatically rather than letting it fester like an untreated splinter under the skin. As he spoke in that rushed cadence familiar from his teenage confessions about sneaking out for late-night drives with friends, I leaned against the counter cluttered with yesterday's mail and a half-eaten apple from breakfast, pressing him for details on why they hadn't looped me in earlier given my role as the steadfast grandmother who hosted sleepovers filled with pillow forts and midnight snacks that always left Lily giggling until her sides ached. But he deflected with assurances that it was a quick procedure done at home with clippers borrowed from a neighbor to avoid the expense of a salon visit, claiming Lily had bounced back with surprising resilience by demanding hats decorated with stickers of her favorite cartoon characters. Yet the pauses in his narrative revealed cracks wider than the ones in the driveway he'd promised to fix last summer, making me suspect there were layers to this story involving Carla's unyielding need for control that sometimes bordered on the absurd. Like her insistence on color-coded schedules for everything from laundry days to family movie nights that left little room for spontaneity in their otherwise orderly suburban life. After hanging up with a promise to discuss it further in person soon, I spent the morning pacing my living room adorned with faded quilts draped over the couch and shelves lined with photo albums chronicling milestones from David's birth to Lily's first steps. The uncertainty gnawing at me like a persistent itch, because while his words offered a partial rationale rooted in everyday parenting woes that many families in our community faced amid rising costs for everything from daycare to doctor copays, they failed to address the emotional toll on a child who idolized her curls as much as she did the fairy tales I read with exaggerated voices to bring the pages alive, prompting me to channel my restless energy into action by heading to the public library on Main Street that afternoon. Its familiar scent of aged paper and polished wood floors providing a sanctuary where I could sift through stacks of parenting journals and health pamphlets under the soft hum of fluorescent lights that cast long shadows across the reading tables occupied by retirees. Flipping through newspapers. There, amid articles detailing trichotillomania as a response to anxiety triggers, such as parental arguments overheard through thin walls, or the pressure of living up to expectations in a world obsessed with appearances, I uncovered subtle clues pointing toward environmental stressors like financial instability that mirrored the whispers I'd heard about Carla's real estate career hitting a slump after a string of unsold listings in the slowing housing market. And a touch of dark humor surfaced in my mind as I imagined her consulting some online forum where well-meaning strangers suggested radical interventions like the shave as a budget-friendly reset. Chuckling inwardly at the notion of turning family therapy into a DIY project with electric shears instead of actual counseling sessions that might cost a pretty penny but yield real results. Energized by this reconnaissance that painted Carla not as a monster, but as a flawed woman grappling with demons of her own, perhaps inherited from a childhood marked by her vague tales of a nomadic upbringing across state lines, I returned home with a printed stack of resources tucked under my arm, formulating my initial act of revenge not as outright confrontation that could alienate David further, but as a sly undercurrent designed to prick at Carla's composure during their upcoming weekly family dinner, an event she hosted with the precision of a military drill to maintain the illusion of harmony in their two-story colonial home, complete with a manicured lawn and a swing set in the backyard that Lily loved pushing to its creaky limits. By evening, I arrived bearing my signature lasagna layered with ricotta and ground beef simmered in herbs from my windowsill garden, the aroma wafting through their dining room where the table was set with cloth napkins and candles flickering against the walls adorned with framed prints of serene landscapes that belied the tensions simmering beneath. And as we settled in with plates steaming and glasses clinking in tentative toasts to the summer's end, I navigated the conversation with calculated wit, steering it toward tales of unconventional parenting hacks from my era, like using vinegar rinses for stubborn tangles rather than resorting to drastic measures. My comments laced with just enough innocence to make Carla's fork hover midway to her mouth, while David shifted uncomfortably in his seat beside her, his eyes pleading for me to drop it even as Lily chattered about her new hat collection. That made her feel like a secret agent on missions around the house. The light vulgarity of the situation amused me privately as I pictured Carla's internal monologue defending her choice against my veiled barbs that highlighted the value of consulting elders before appending traditions. A clever subversion that left her defending the shave as an empowering move inspired by celebrity stories of bold transformations, her voice rising slightly in pitch until the doorbell interrupted with its cheerful chime, delivering an unassuming envelope addressed to David in plain block letters without a return address that he accepted from the mail carrier with a puzzled frown, and as the dinner wound down amid dessert of fresh peach cobbler baked to golden perfection, he excused himself to the study to open it privately, emerging later with a pallor that drained the color from his face while muttering about unexpected complications from an old credit card debt they'd thought was settled. The revelation hanging unfinished in the air like a storm cloud over the picnic table remnants outside, leaving me to drive home under the streetlights wondering if this mysterious correspondence tied directly into the pressures that led to Lily's altered appearance or signaled a deeper unraveling that would force all of us to confront choices we'd rather keep buried in the backyard alongside last year's forgotten holiday decorations. The mysterious envelope from that family dinner weighed on my thoughts like an uninvited guest lingering long after the last plate had been cleared and the candles snuffed out, its stark white edges peeking from David's pocket as he tried to brush it off with a vague mention of routine billing surprises that happen to everyone in these tough economic times when even the corner hardware store starts charging interest on layaway plans for basic tools. But the pallor on his face and the way Carla's eyes flicked toward it with a sharpness that could cut glass told me this was no ordinary statement from the electric company, but something deeper rooted in the financial quicksand their household seemed to be sinking into ever since David took that sales position, requiring overnight drives to distant clients that left Carla juggling Lily's routines single-handedly amid her own erratic commissions from showing empty houses to picky buyers in a market cooled by interest rate hikes. Unable to shake the nagging pull of curiosity that had always driven me to uncover truths during my years managing the books for our small family business before retirement, I decided the next morning to pursue a more personal line of inquiry by phoning my longtime friend Martha from the neighborhood book club, the one whose network of connections span the local coffee shops and PTA meetings like invisible threads, weaving the community's secrets together, and over a mid-morning chat in her sunlit kitchen filled with the aroma of cinnamon scones fresh from the oven and the faint chime of wind chimes outside her bay window overlooking the community garden, she confirmed my suspicions with details gleaned from casual conversations at the grocery checkout where Carla had let slip about dipping into savings for unexpected repairs on their minivan that ferried Lily to dance classes and soccer practices without fail. Martha's recounting painted a vivid portrait of escalating pressures including Carla's frustration with David's absences that turned minor disagreements into full-blown arguments echoing through open windows on quiet evenings, and amid her sympathetic nods, a subtle twist emerged when she mentioned overhearing Carla at the pharmacy counter picking up a prescription for a mild anxiety aid not just for herself, but possibly extended to family use in creative ways. A detail that sent a ripple of unease through me because it hinted at the shave being more than a simple intervention for Lily's habit, but perhaps a desperate measure to mask symptoms of broader household turmoil that could ripple out to affect the child's sense of security in ways far beyond a temporary bald spot. This revelation deepened the dilemma churning inside me as I drove home past the familiar strip malls with their faded signs advertising back-to-school sales and family counseling services tucked into modest offices, forcing me to confront the possibility that my vengeful nudges during dinner might be exacerbating the very stresses contributing to Lily's distress rather than alleviating them, a self-doubt that made me question the righteousness of my protective instincts even as they burned brighter with each passing hour, evoking a mix of empathy for Carla's burdens and irritation at her secretive handling that excluded me from the support role I'd always embraced with open arms and homemade meals delivered on rainy days. To balance this internal conflict, I arranged an impromptu pickup from Lily's preschool that very afternoon, framing it as a surprise adventure to the nearby ice cream parlor where the wooden booths sticky from generations of spills and the whir of the soft-serve machine created a nostalgic bubble away from adult complications. And as we sat sharing a sundae piled high with rainbow sprinkles that Lily meticulously sorted by color before devouring, her chatter flowed freely about the day's finger-painting project depicting a family under a sunny sky that she insisted included Grandma's house with its big oak tree perfect for climbing, but then in a quieter moment while licking chocolate from her spoon, she confided something odd that halted my heart mid-beat, describing how the night before the haircut Mommy had given her a special drink that tasted like cherries but made the room spin like a merry-go-round at the county fair, easing her into sleep so the buzzing clippers wouldn't scare her awake. A detail delivered with the wide-eyed innocence Of a child reciting a bedtime ritual rather than recognizing potential red flags that screamed overreach in my adult mind, trained by years of reading every parenting newsletter that crossed my mailbox. This confession amplified the uncertainty swirling around the true motivations behind the shave, planting seeds of worry that the cherry-flavored sedative might tie into Carla's pharmacy visits, or even a misguided attempt to manage Lily's anxiety without professional oversight, leaving me torn between scooping her up for a protective escape to my home filled with board games and storybooks that promised unfiltered joy and holding back to avoid painting myself as the interfering in-law who could drive a permanent wedge between David and me. Emotions that had the audience in my head, those imagined family members and friends weighing in silently, disagreeing with my escalating interventions as potentially harmful oversteps in a situation already teetering on fragile ground. Channeling this turmoil into purposeful action, I turned my focus to the upcoming Parent Volunteer Day at Lily's school. That bustling elementary with its colorful murals on the brick walls and the playground alive with shouts during recess that symbolized the untroubled world children deserved. Arriving early with a tray of my oatmeal raisin cookies baked to chewy perfection and infused with just enough spice to evoke comfort without overwhelming the palate, positioning myself amid the cluster of mothers and a few fathers milling about the gymnasium where folding tables groaned under craft supplies and sign-up sheets for field trips to the local history museum. There, amid conversations laced with pride over report cards and upcoming bake sales that funded everything from new playground equipment to art supplies, I wove my revenge with the finesse of a storyteller's spinning yarn at a quilting bee, casually praising Lily's recent transformation as a bold statement of self-expression. Inspired by Carla's innovative parenting that encouraged breaking free from societal norms around appearance, my tone laced with exaggerated admiration that drew nods from the group while subtly prompting questions about the reasoning behind such a drastic step for a kindergartner still mastering the art of tying her shoes. The witty undercurrent of my words landed like gentle jabs during a friendly boxing match, forcing Carla, who arrived fashionably late in her tailored blouse and slacks that screamed professional poise, to field the ensuing inquiries with explanations about building resilience against bullies through unexpected changes. Her responses growing clipped as the circle tightened around her with sympathetic murmurs that masked underlying curiosity about whether this was a one-time experiment or part of a larger philosophy, and the satisfaction of this clever exposure washed over me like the warm afternoon sun filtering through the gym windows, a light vulgarity in my private amusement at watching her squirm under the weight of her own choices, paraded in the court of parental opinion without me uttering a single direct accusation. As the event drew to a close with children bursting in from classes to claim their parents amid hugs and backpacks slung over small shoulders, Carla maneuvered through the crowd to corner me near the exit doors propped open to the parking lot where minivans idled with engines humming softly. Her expression a storm cloud of controlled fury as she leaned in close enough for me to catch the faint scent of her citrus perfume mingled with the day's exertion, demanding in a hushed tone edged with accusation whether I had orchestrated the afternoon's interrogation disguised as casual chit-chat, her eyes narrowing in a way that transformed her usual composed demeanor into something predatory and unyielding, whispering harshly that some family matters were better left undisturbed lest they unearthed truths capable of shattering the delicate balance holding everything together for Lily's sake, the threat implicit in her words sending a chill racing down my spine despite the humid air pressing in from outside, leaving me rooted to the spot with my keys clutched tightly as she turned on her heel and strode away toward her car where Lily waited obliviously in the back seat with a juice box in hand. The confrontation propelling the growing conflict into uncharted territory where the lines between ally and adversary blurred, further forcing me to wonder just what buried secrets her warning aimed to protect and how far I would go to illuminate them before the darkness consumed us all. Carla's whispered threat from the school parking lot reverberated through my days like an unwelcome echo in an empty house, Her words about leaving matters undisturbed carrying the weight of a locked diary I couldn't pry open despite the burning curiosity that had always propelled me through life's uncertainties, from balancing checkbooks during lean months to mending fences after heated family holidays that left grudges simmering longer than the turkey in the oven. And as the week progressed toward Labor Day, with its promise of one last burst of summer barbecues before the crisp fall air ushered in school routines and shorter evenings, I found myself wrestling with the dilemma her confrontation had ignited, questioning whether my series of clever interventions were truly safeguarding Lily or merely stoking the flames of resentment that could isolate me from the very granddaughter whose laughter had become the bright spot in my otherwise solitary routine of tending to the garden, beds, out back, and volunteering at the senior center, where stories of bygone eras flowed as freely as the weak coffee from the communal pot. This internal tug-of-war intensified during a late afternoon phone call from David that caught me off guard while I was folding laundry in the living room with its worn armchairs and the faint scent of line-dried sheets wafting through the open window. His voice laced with a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights spent staring at ceiling fans in their master bedroom upstairs, from where Lily's room held her collection of stuffed animals, now supplemented by an array of colorful hats to conceal the regrowth that poked through like tentative sprouts after a spring rain. And when I pressed him gently about the envelope's contents that still loomed large in my mind, he finally cracked open a fuller accounting of their mounting pressures, admitting that the debt stemmed from a cascade of setbacks, including Carla's stalled career after a major client backed out of a home sale at the last minute, and his own commissions dwindling from canceled orders in a volatile economy where businesses tighten belts faster than a politician dodging questions at a town hall. As he unraveled this threadbare tapestry of financial strain that had them skipping date nights in favor of home-cooked meals stretched to cover 3, and debating whether to sell the swing set to fund Lily's extracurriculars, a medical twist surfaced in his halting confession that the pediatrician had initially flagged possible alopecia areata triggered by the household stress, recommending a scalp examination that they bypassed in favor of the home shave to inspect for scarring without incurring the hefty deductible from their patchwork insurance plan. A pragmatic yet heartbreaking shortcut that humanized their desperation while fueling my outrage at being sidelined from decisions affecting the child who'd spent countless afternoons in my kitchen learning to measure flour for biscuits with the precision of a little scientist. Hearing this partial truth delivered over the crackle of the line, amid the distant hum of traffic on the highway that bisected our town, I felt a surge of empathy clashing with frustration, because while it explained the shave as a cost-saving measure rooted in the all-too-relatable American struggle of making ends meet without dipping into retirement savings or burdening extended family, it also highlighted Carla's role in steering them toward unorthodox solutions that skirted professional advice, leaving me to ponder if my vengeful pokes were pushing David deeper into complicity or coaxing him toward the honesty our bond demanded. Emotions that stirred a quiet disagreement within me about the ferocity of my approach, as it risked fracturing the generational ties that had weathered storms from my own parenting days through to this modern era of apps and instant consultations. Undeterred yet tempered by this revelation, I agreed to attend their Labor Day gathering as a show of support, arriving at their backyard transformed with red and white bunting strung between the oak trees, and a long table groaning under platters of grilled corn glistening with butter, potato salad dotted with hard-boiled eggs, and ribs slow-cooked to fall off the bone tenderness that filled the air with a smoky allure, drawing relatives from across the county who arrived in waves of hugs and coolers packed with craft beers chilled to perfection. Amid the lively chatter about back-to-school preparations and the latest football predictions that had uncles animatedly debating team prospects over plastic cups foaming at the rims, I bided my time until the meal's midpoint, when forks paused and eyes turned expectant for toasts that traditionally celebrated the season's close. Seizing the moment to raise my glass of lemonade sweetened with honey from the local apiary in a gesture that blended sincerity with subtle subversion, recounting a light-hearted anecdote from my youth about my mother's unconventional remedies for childhood ailments, like using onion poultices for earaches that never involved altering appearances, but always restored confidence through shared family rituals. My words weaving praise for resilience with an undercurrent of gentle mockery toward trendy fixes that overlooked the wisdom of collective input, drawing chuckles from the aunts who nodded in recognition while Carla's smile froze into a porcelain mask. Across the table, her fingers tightening around her napkin in a way that betrayed the sting of my witty reprisal delivered under the guise of nostalgic storytelling. The satisfaction of this bolder revenge coursed through me like the fizzy bubbles in the root beer floats passed around for the children. A clever escalation that exposed the shave's peculiarities without naming names and forced Carla to interject with a strained laugh about modern parenting's bold experiments inspired by social media trends. Her deflection only amplifying the group's murmured curiosities that lingered like the haze from the grill as the afternoon waned into games of tag for the kids and lazy lounging on lawn chairs for the adults, watching the sun dip toward the horizon in a blaze of amber hues. Emboldened by the day's undercurrents, I took it a step further that evening after most guests had departed with Tupperware of leftovers and promises of holiday cards, slipping away to text an anonymous tip to the editor of our neighborhood newsletter. A chatty retiree from the book club whose column thrived on feel-good tales of local inspiration, detailing a heartwarming story of a young girl's brave haircut to combat bullying, ensuring it highlighted the family's innovative spirit while subtly noting the need for community resources on child stress, a maneuver that would circulate the narrative far and wide by week's end, planting seeds of public scrutiny that Carla's polished facade couldn't easily uproot, and providing me with a private chuckle at the absurdity of turning her private choice into unwitting fodder for the town's collective consciousness. As twilight settled and I lingered to help tidy the scattered chairs and crumpled napkins that dotted the grass like fallen leaves, the impending conflict crested when I passed near the open kitchen window on my way to fetch a forgotten sweater from the mudroom. Overhearing David and Carla's voices rise in a heated exchange that sliced through the cooling air with the sharpness of kitchen knives clashing against cutting boards, her accusations flying about his loose lips spilling too much to me. During our call and unraveling the careful narrative they'd constructed for outsiders, met by his retort that burying secrets was eroding their foundation faster than termites in an old barn. Words laced with pleas for trust amid threats of consequences that could upend their carefully curated life, the raw intensity of their argument freezing me in place with a dish towel clutched in my hands as the door swung shut behind me, leaving the fragile equilibrium of our family poised on the brink of irreversible fallout and me grappling with the realization that my revenges, however satisfying, might have ignited a powder keg threatening to engulf Lily in the blast. The raw edges of David and Carla's kitchen argument from that Labor Day evening sliced through my thoughts during the drive home under a sky bruised with the fading light of dusk, their voices replaying in my mind like a looped recording on an old cassette player that caught and distorted the pleas for trust amid accusations of betrayal that hinted at fractures running deeper than the financial woes he'd partially confessed over coffee at the diner where the vinyl booths stuck to our clothes, and the waitress refilled mugs with a familiarity born from years of locals airing grievances over eggs and hash browns, leaving me to navigate the dimly lit streets lined with houses aglow from porch lights welcoming families back from the holiday, with the weight of uncertainty pressing heavier than the groceries I'd forgotten to pick up on the way. Because while my revenges had delivered those satisfying moments of witty exposure that made Carla's composure crack like thin ice underfoot, they also amplified the growing conflict in ways that forced me to confront how my protective fervor might be contributing to the very instability threatening Lily's world. A dilemma that had me second-guessing the cleverness of my anonymous newsletter tip as it no doubt circulated through email chains and coffee clutches by morning, painting their private choice in the broad strokes of community inspiration while subtly underscoring the need for professional guidance in handling childhood stresses that went beyond clippers and cherry-flavored distractions. This self-reckoning carried into the following days where the air turned cooler with the first whispers of autumn leaves crunching under tires in the driveway, prompting me to arrange a final outing with Lily under the guise of a county fair visit that promised the whirl of carnival rides and the sticky sweetness of cotton candy spun into clouds on sticks that always drew out her unbridled joy amid the cacophony of Barker's hawking games. of ring toss and the sizzle of corn dogs frying in vats of oil, and as we wandered hand in hand past stalls, brimming with handmade quilts and jars of preserves glowing amber under string lights that twinkled like distant stars, she tugged me toward the Ferris wheel where the seats swayed gently as it crested the skyline, her small voice rising above the midway clamor to share a poignant clue that twisted the knife in my chest, confiding in a burst of trust born from the day's magic that Mommy had been packing boxes in the attic late at night while Daddy slept on the couch downstairs, talking on the phone about starting fresh in a bustling city far from the familiar streets where neighbors waved from porches and school buses rumbled reliably each morning. A revelation delivered with the casual innocence of a child imagining grand adventures rather than grasping the potential upheaval of uprooting her life from the garden swings and grandma visits that anchored her days. Hearing this, amid the fair's festive din that masked the undercurrents of my rising panic, I felt the emotions surge in a torrent that made me pull her close during the slow descent from the wheel's peak, hugging her against the plush toy she'd won at the duck pond game while inwardly grappling with the ambiguity of their plans. Was this a desperate escape from debts piling higher than the hay bales in the livestock pens, or a calculated retreat from the scrutiny my interventions had invited, leaving me torn between applauding my role in forcing transparency and lamenting how it might drive them away? A conflict that stirred disagreement even within myself as I wondered if softening my stance could preserve the fragile threads connecting us, or if holding firm was the only way to ensure Lily's stability in a family teetering on relocation's edge. The full weight of David's explanation materialized a few days later during an impromptu meetup at the same roadside diner where the jukebox played faint country tunes about lost loves and second chances over the clatter of silverware and the aroma of fresh pie cooling on the windowsill, his arrival marked by the slump of his shoulders under a flannel shirt worn from too many washes, and the shadows under his eyes that spoke of nights divided between spreadsheets tracking overdue bills and reassurances to Carla that therapy sessions booked through a sliding scale clinic would mend the rifts without appending their home, and as we settled into a booth away from the breakfast rush with menus sticky from syrup spills, he laid bare the tangled origins of the shave in a narrative that blended regret with defensiveness, revealing that Lily's hair pulling had indeed spiraled from the alopecia suspicions confirmed by a hurried telehealth visit they couldn't afford to follow up in person. But Carla's insistence on the home procedure stemmed from her own unresolved traumas of a childhood spent bouncing between relatives after her parents' divorce left her craving control in a life that felt perpetually adrift, twisting an online suggestion for gentle interventions into a drastic reset administered with that mild sedative sourced discreetly to spare Lily the terror of the clippers buzz echoing in the bathroom tiled with memories of bubble baths and bedtime songs. This confession, delivered in halting sentences punctuated by sips of black coffee that steamed between us, offered a partial absolution rooted in the pressures of middle-class survival where copays loomed like storm clouds and pride prevented asking for help from the very family network that had always been our safety net. Yet it shrouded key elements in ambiguity. Was the alopecia truly environmental or genetic, echoing unspoken histories in Carla's lineage, and did the packing boxes signal a genuine fresh start, or a bluff to regain leverage in their marital standoff? Questions that hung unresolved like the diner's neon sign flickering outside against the overcast sky, evoking a rush of emotions where empathy for their plight clashed with indignation at the secrecy that excluded me from mitigating the fallout on Lily, making the imagined voices of friends and kin in my head urge a compassionate retreat even as my instincts screamed for deeper accountability. For my ultimate revenge, I opted for a stroke of empowerment disguised as benevolence, channeling it through an anonymous donation to the local Family Resource Center's counseling fund via the church bulletin that arrived in their mailbox the next week, earmarked specifically for the Hayes family with a cryptic note reading for true fresh starts that nourish rather than shear, may wisdom guide the regrowth, a witty fusion of metaphor and practicality that ensured their sessions proceeded without the barrier of fees while subtly reminding them of the shave's echoes in every family decision henceforth, the light vulgarity of envisioning Carla's reaction, a mix of gratitude and gritted teeth, providing a final air of satisfaction amid the chuckles I shared privately with the pastor over tea in his study lined with inspirational plaques. As the dust from these revelations settled in the quiet rhythm of ensuing weeks, marked by a tentative sleepover at my house where Lily and I crafted paper crowns from construction sheets to crown her emerging curls that tickled like new grass under our fingertips during story time beneath the comforter scented with chamomile. The story's threads refused to tie neatly, with David's follow-up call pleading for reconciliation over shared dinners and Carla's pointed silences speaking volumes about lingering resentments that simmered without boiling over, leaving me at my kitchen table one crisp morning with a mug of herbal tea cooling untouched as I gazed at the calendar marking upcoming holidays that loomed with promise and peril, pondering the choices we'd all made in this tapestry of love and loss where Lily's future dangled like an unanswered question in the wind, the truth's full contours forever just beyond reach. Inviting you to reflect on the hidden changes lurking in your own celebrations and the revenges that shaped them, unresolved and resonant long after the fairground lights dim.